let's say we both agree.
Not what I'm saying.
I know it's not. Let's say we both agree, for the sake of this conversation, to say Geno's been great. This is as good as Geno's going to be, and he's not been the problem, okay? He's been really good. He's been the reason they've succeeded. But the offensive line has been so challenging that it has torn him down over the course of the year. You can't get past that. The sacks and the time and everything that's put on him. If you bring back Geno Smith next year with a raise, and you bring back DK Metcalf next year, even at his current contract, let alone the fact that he's going to want to get a new contract heading into the last year of his deal, do you think that's going to get better?
Are you not going to free up $20 million with Lockett?
Yeah,
You're
a little bit with
free
Lockett.
up $10 or $15 million with Dre Jones. You're not going to free up this is the thing about.
But you also have
NFL.
things that you've got to spend on. You got a new contract for Charles Cross, and you're going to have to deal with Ernest Jones. And I mean, there's still some things you've got to do. Yep. So some of that's going to balance out. Without making some sort of a change, do you see how it gets better?
Yeah, I don't see how eliminating Geno, this thing gets better. I
doesn't right away.
I think you win tonight. I think if you have a chance to win the following week, you get to 10-7. And those are big ifs, and they got to, do things, better than they have, more consistently than they have. But I don't see in any world
Let me come back
eliminating Geno Smith from this. And
I don't think it does either.
Contract
I
money.
don't think eliminating Geno Smith from your roster makes you better. But I don't know that keeping him here, at the same level of where you're going, gets you good enough to compete for a Super Bowl. So if that's the case, how are you going to set yourself up to win a Super Bowl?
Yep.
And that doesn't mean, by the way, moving on from Geno Smith is necessarily the right move. I'm not saying that. But you've got to be thinking about your long-term plan at quarterback. You can't tell me that a long-term commitment to 34-year-old Geno Smith is the best way to win a Super Bowl. That just doesn't make any sense. I can't imagine if you were to poll 32 GMs and say, hey, what do you make of the long-term strategy of committing to 34-year-old Geno Smith to win a Super Bowl? They'd all be like, yeah, that makes sense. That's going to give you the best chance. You've got to give yourself the best chance to win a Super Bowl.
Yep.
So you've got to have hard conversations, and you've got to think not just about what it means in the short term, but what it can mean in the long term. And Geno Smith getting paid somewhere, in the 20s in terms of quarterback salary, yeah, maybe. But if he's looking for a raise and you're looking to spend more at the quarterback position, I just don't see how that helps you win.
Have beers with Mike McDonald when this year ends, whenever that is, at Dino's across the way there. And I don't know. He's a little sleep deprived. He's kind of a big, strong guy. It might take 6 or 7, I don't know, to ultimately get to some real, blunt truth, honesty, and say, Mike, do you want to be paired with Geno? I mean, you're first-time head coach. We know how this works all around the league. We know why, those rumors of Pete to Chicago, because Pete is looking at the number 1 pick, looking at a transcendent physical talent in some ways that many deem, Caleb Williams, and say, Mike, do you want to, for the next couple of years, be hip-to-hip with Geno? I think he would say absolutely. Geno is you got to go through a lot of problems on this roster,
right? Before you get to Geno Smith, I agree with that.
Before you get to Geno Smith,
and I think if I'm Mike McDonald and I'm a second-year head coach and going into next year, yeah, I still want a veteran. I think there's a lot of value to having a veteran if you are a young head coach. We had Evan Cohen on a couple weeks ago, and I thought, made some pretty astute points about that. Hey, if he was going through his rules for quarterbacks, remember we talked through this, and I think we kind of agreed with most of what he had to say in terms of his quarterback rules, but the new one he'd been working on was no rookie head coaches with rookie quarterbacks, essentially.
Yep.
If you're going to have a rookie quarterback, you got to have a veteran head coach, and if you're going to have a rookie head coach, you better have a veteran quarterback. And I think there's probably a lot to that. And even next year, Mike's still going to be really young, still one of the youngest coaches in the league. There's a chance there'll be a new offensive coordinator. There's probably a lot of value at that point to having a veteran quarterback. But if you're doing that without forming your long-term succession plan, you're doing a disservice to the organization.
I think that's fair. I honestly think that is a fair deal. And I think there is enough flexibility within this salary cap, and the way that John and his crew have always been able to massage it, Salk, that there are opportunities to do that and to help this team. We started the show, it's at 8:30, whatever, talking about DK Metcalf. you want to free up some salary. You want to free up $30 million. I would much rather free it up going down that direction than thinking of freeing it up moving on from Geno Smith. Because of the supply chain at receiver in the draft. It's
not about moving on from Geno. I'm not trying to say they need to move on from Geno. It's about making sure that what you spend on him is reasonable.
And what it's been. Because what it's been the last couple years.
You can't overspend on that.
Yep.
You just can't. I think that really does hurt you if you start to overspend on Geno. And I think the problem you're in this offseason is that this isn't a great offseason to try to solve this problem, which stinks. Because the last couple of off seasons might have been, and you weren't able to take advantage of those and bring in a quarterback that could be more of a long-term plan. Now you got Mark Schlereth saying, and I think that's easy to agree, there aren't a lot of options right now.
One, what's the alternative? Who are you going to go get? Are you going to go get somebody in the draft? Is there somebody in free agents? Is there another Sam Darnold out there, that's going to have this breakout year? But then again, it's got to be in the perfect scenario, in the perfect system. And then I would also tell you that, talking to offensive coaches, as you develop an offense, as you develop a plan, as you grow together, continuity becomes so important. You don't know what you don't like in any given offense until you run it and you get your ass kicked doing it. I had this conversation with Mike Shanahan. He said it really takes you about 3 years into a system before you've repped pretty much everything that's in that system in the areas of the football field that you're going to rep it, and to where you have mastery of that particular offense.
And that was in an era where they started the offseason in March. That was in an era when you put helmets on the offseason.
And the guys showed up.
And it was full go. I mean, that was in an era where you had training camp, you could put pads on and you could rep all these things and do live stuff. That was in that era, and so we're talking about a totally different era. We're talking about a totally different timing schedule, right? For head coaches and coordinators all around this league. There is no time and patience and development, all of that stuff, which is why, so many of these young quarterbacks have flamed out, right? And are not playing in anywhere near as productive a level as your franchise needs them to be. So it is a challenging conundrum. I think we're on the same level playing field, Salk, and that is in the short term, Geno is going to be your best answer. Geno is not.
But if you don't have that, but if he starts playing a leverage game and saying, "Look, man, I'm not going to play for less than $50 million," what are you going to do?
Right?
You can pay him $50 million. And you can even say, oh, well, you can massage the cap and this and that. The problem with that is that hit is going to end up coming later when you're going to be moving on from him in all likelihood.
What have the Seahawks done in the past with players in those situations?
They've generally said no.
They've generally said, good luck.
Okay.
You're going to have to come and make your money and have to come report, and you got one more year on your deal.
Okay.
So
well, what if that hardball goes both ways? As you said, Geno's pretty stubborn. He really did have a weird day on Sunday. Again, I thought he really didn't play all that well and was a big part of the problem. Do you see the video of him kind of shouting match with a fan and all
At
that?
the end of it?
Yeah. What's that about?
Yeah. Hard-headed, stubborn, emotional.
Okay.
All of
okay, well, so let's go back to that hard-headed, stubborn, emotional thing.
Sure.
Does that sound like a guy who's not going to press whatever leverage you're talking about here? As you're saying, well, they don't have any other options. You don't think Geno and his agent can figure that out?
Well, I mean, you're going to be 35 next fall, bud. So, I mean, do you want to make the 35 million or 38 million or whatever you're going to make next year under the contract that you have signed? Like that leverage goes both ways. And we watched it with Cam Chancellor and we watched it with many others. Like that's just, we don't cave. We don't play that game.
Well, they've caved with a quarterback.
Old Russ?
Yeah. I mean, the first time.
They got the deal done.
Yeah.
Yeah, they ultimately
we got a deal.
Oh, gosh.
But they did. I mean, like, ultimately, they were a contending football team that needed their quarterback.
Sure.
I think you would argue the same thing will be true of them this offseason, right? I mean, if they don't make the playoffs, they'll miss it by a game. I mean, they're right there with a hope of getting better next year with, a second year in the coach and all the other whatever else they can do. They don't want to mess around with a quarterback controversy in the offseason and maybe not have a second opportunity. So I think Geno could press his advantage there, and that's where I start to get pretty nervous about the idea of spending a higher percentage of your cap on a quarterback that I don't know is is worth doing that for.
Yep. Nope, I think all of that is fair. And these next 120 minutes of football are pretty darn significant for Mr. Gino, for his escalators, right? Remember that comes into play too. You're talking about some millions of dollars that if you can get to 10 wins, some millions of dollars if you can outdo some of the numbers that, you did in your comeback player of the year. Like there's some significant money still to be had, let alone just the confidence in the play.
Yeah.
To go out there and show that you are, one of the 10 to 15 best in the league. Try to change that narrative that has been out there in the market, that's been out there in Mike Sando's tiers, that you're just a tier 3 guy. These 120 minutes versus Caleb Williams and Matthew Stafford, they go a long way for him.
Sure.
They really do.
Yeah.
And what he can put together on a season that right now has 17 touchdowns to 15 picks. Throw 3 more touchdowns tonight with no picks. Get to 20 and 15.
That would help.
You know what I'm saying? Like, help some of those numbers versus, well, here's, again, every one of these games, and it's going to be in prime time tonight, game day. Like, here's a boneheaded mistake. Here's turnover-worthy play. Here's some of these things that create those narratives that have been really, really sticky for them.